Everyone in this house warned me about this door. They said no one was allowed to enter, no matter what they heard behind it, and I couldn't just walk away. Luca, are you all right?
I am fine. You must leave.
There was a room on the 4th floor of the Moretti estate with a black lacquer door and a silver saint nailed to the center of it. The rule for the staff was primitive and absolute. You dust up to the frame. Never across it, you do not knock, you do not linger. You do not ask why the most feared man in the city needed one room in his own house that even armed men pretended not to see. The rumors were ugly enough to grow legs. Some said Luca Moretti used it to break informants. Some said it held enough cash to buy a mayor and bury a jury. One dishwasher swore the boss kept the names of every judge, cop, and union head he owned written in a red leather book inside. They were all wrong. When the new maid finally opened that door, she did not find a torture chamber. She found a candlelit chapel. A child's nursery preserved like a shrine. A wall of silent surveillance monitors hidden behind carved walnut panels. And Luca Moretti himself, king of the waterfront, patron saint of bad men, collector of blood debts, collapsed on the floor in his own blood with a pistol in one hand and Mara Doyle's last name open in a ledger beside him. And that was the moment her life stopped being cheap. Mara had not taken the job at the Moretti estate because she was brave. She had taken it because dialysis was expensive, landlords were not sentimental, and overdue notices had a way of piling up on a kitchen table like threats from God. The agency paid in cash, Friday afternoons, white envelopes. No taxes, no questions, the kind of work people with options avoided. Mrs. Voss, the head housekeeper, was shaped like a church pew and just as warm on Mara's first morning. She walked her through the estate with the clipped efficiency of a prison warden. The marble foyer, the west dining room, the solarium no one used. The study no one entered without gloves. The kitchen where every knife had a place and every silence meant something. "You clean what is dirty," Mrs. Voss said in a voice that sounded filed down to the bone. "You ignore what is expensive. You never touch a phone that is ringing. You never repeat what you hear. If Mr. Moretti addresses you, you answer. If he does not, you become furniture. And under no circumstances do you go to the 4th floor east corridor." Mara had nodded. She grew up in neighborhoods where survival was mostly the art of pretending not to notice things. A busted lip, a siren at 2 a.m., a man stuffing cash into an envelope with hands that shook. She understood rules, especially the kind delivered without explanation. She also knew who Luca Moretti was. Everybody did. He was the reason the docks unloaded on time, the reason certain bars never got raided, the reason city councilmen suddenly retired to Florida after voting the wrong way. Men like that were never called kings out loud. But everyone behaved as if a crown sat on their head just the same for the first month. The estate was exactly what it appeared to be. A palace built by people who preferred fear to architecture. The floors were imported stone so polished they looked wet. The windows were thick enough to stop a bullet. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will leave you amazed. Where are you listening to this story from? Tell us the name of your city in the comments. Cameras watched from corners disguised as brass rosettes. Men in tailored suits drifted through hallways like expensive wolves, each one with an earpiece, a sidearm, and the dead calm of somebody who had hurt people before breakfast. Mara kept her head down. She scrubbed wine from crystal. She steamed blood out of ivory upholstery without asking whose. She found a broken molar under a billiards table one Thursday night and dropped a linen napkin over it the way Mrs. Voss had taught her. She wiped fingerprints off decanters after midnight meetings and pretended not to hear raised voices through oak doors. She saw Luca Moretti only twice at first, the first time. He crossed the foyer in a charcoal suit with rain on his shoulders, and 6 men orbiting him like moons around a black planet. He was tall, broad, and put together with the kind of ruthless symmetry that made handsome feel almost cruel. His face did not move much, his eyes moved even less. Men twice his age stopped talking when he passed. The second time, he stood alone at a window in the library, one hand in his pocket, the harbor lights reflecting faintly off the glass. He looked less like a man enjoying his empire than a man calculating how long it would take to burn. Mara did not care, as long as the envelope appeared on Friday. Luca Moretti could have kept wolves in the guest wing and saints in the cellar. But the fourth floor was different. That corridor felt cursed. Even the guards changed when they passed it. Jokes died, footsteps quieted. Mrs. Voss handled the dusting up there herself, and never allowed a cart beyond the landing. The black door with the silver saint remained shut, silent, and absurdly clean. The other maids talked when they were folding sheets in the laundry room. "It's a confession room," one of them whispered. "My cousin used to drive for one of Moretti's captains. Said the boss keeps recordings in there. Blackmail, bribes. All of it." "No," another said, eyes wide. "It's where his first wife died. He was never married. Then his mistress. Then his victim." Mara said nothing. She kept feeding pillowcases through the press and let them chase ghosts for sport. But after a while, little things began to change. Luca stopped coming downstairs for coffee. The men in suits stopped relaxing in the kitchen between shifts. They hovered more. Listened more. The Underboss, Vincent Caruso, started appearing in the main house at all hours, drifting through rooms with a smile too polished to mean anything good. Vincent was the opposite of Luca in the most dangerous way. Luca was cold. Vincent was warm. Luca frightened people by saying less than necessary. Vincent did it by saying exactly what people wanted to hear while his eyes searched for a soft place to put the knife. He dressed like a senator and moved like a pickpocket. Mara saw him one afternoon in the pantry, speaking quietly to two soldiers near the freezer. "If the boss needs rest, he gets rest," Vincent murmured. "I'll handle the captains until he's back on his feet." "Back from where?" Nobody asked because Luca Moretti was still in the house. Mara knew that for certain at midnight the night before. She had been carrying fresh towels up the back stairs when she saw him on the landing above her. Barely just a shape at first, then a man gripping the banister so hard his knuckles blanched white. He was not wearing a suit. He wore black slacks, an open dress shirt, and a dark stain spread wide across his left side. His skin had gone the color of old paper. Sweat shone on his temples. He stood there breathing like every inhale cost him something permanent. Mara stepped back into the shadows before he saw her. He stayed that way for 3 long seconds, jaw tight, eyes shut, gathering himself with sheer animal force. Then he climbed the stairs one at a time and disappeared toward the forbidden corridor. By morning, Vincent was telling everyone Luca was handling business out of town. Mara had grown up with liars. She recognized the posture. The storm came 2 nights later, not rain, not weather. A full-throated coastal tantrum that slammed the estate with wind hard enough to rattle the leaded windows in their frames. The harbor vanished behind a wall of black water. Tree limbs clawed the glass. The power flickered twice before the generator kicked in with a low mechanical groan that seemed to vibrate through the whole house. Most of the armed men were outside securing the gate or in the garage checking vehicles. Mrs. Voss had sent Mara to clear a flood in the upstairs linen room because the old estate liked choosing the worst possible moment to remember it was built. Before modern mercy. By 1:40 a.m., Mara was exhausted. Her uniform was damp at the knees, her shoulders ached, and she smelled like bleach and wet cotton. She was hauling a bucket back down the back stairs when she heard it. Glass breaking, not downstairs, not outside, above her. Then a sound that made her stop cold. A man trying not to cry out. It came from the 4th floor. Mara stood in the half-dark stairwell, one hand on the bucket handle, and listened as thunder rolled over the roof. Nothing for a moment, then a second noise. A hard, ugly thud. Something heavy hitting wood. Followed by one ragged, involuntary breath. The smart decision was obvious. Go downstairs, finish the job. Finish the job. Pretend the house made old noises when it stormed. But she could still hear that breath in her head. And some people were ruined by decent mothers. Mara left the bucket where it was and climbed. The 4th floor corridor was colder than the rest of the house. The air had that sealed, untouched feel of a mausoleum. Lightning flashed through a far window, whitening the hallway for an instant. The black door at the end sat there with the silver saint fixed to its center, watching. Then the smell hit her. Not rot exactly, not yet, blood, antiseptic. Candle wax. Smoke. Mara walked slowly, every step sounding too loud in the hush. When she reached the door, she saw a dark smear trailing under it and across the polished floorboards. She stared at it. Once you opened a door like that, your life became a witness statement nobody would ever get to read. Her hand shook when she touched the handle. It was unlocked. The door swung inward without a sound. The room beyond was not one room. It was 3 griefs stitched together. The first thing she saw was candlelight, dozens of it. Tall white tapers burning beneath a wall of saints and a framed photograph of a little girl in a white dress. No older than 6, smiling with one front tooth missing. Fresh lilies stood in crystal vases below the photo. The air smelled faintly of incense under the copper sting of blood. The second thing she saw was the nursery. A small bed untouched by time, a shelf of storybooks. A music box shaped like a carousel. A pair of tiny satin shoes placed side by side beneath a chair as if their owner had just stepped out of them. The third thing she saw was the open panel in the walnut wall, revealing rows of surveillance screens, hard drives, taped envelopes, ledgers, and phones. The nerve center of an empire hidden behind a dead child's shrine. And on the Persian rug between the chapel and the nursery, Luca Moretti was on the floor with his back against the base of the crib. One hand clamped to his side, blood soaking through his shirt. In his other hand was a black pistol aimed directly at her chest. His eyes were fever bright, vicious with pain, and alive in a way that made the room feel smaller. "Give me one reason," he rasped. "Not to shoot you," Mara should have screamed. Instead, she looked at the gun, then at the blood under him, then at the photograph of the little girl over his shoulder. And because terror sometimes stripped her voice down to honesty, she said, "Because if you pull that trigger in here, you'll die in front of your daughter before the body hits the floor." Luca stared at her. Thunder shook the windows, then very slightly, the barrel lowered. "Shut the door," he said. Mara stepped inside, pushed the black door closed, and turned the bolt. When she looked back, the pistol had slipped from his hand to the rug. He was still upright by force of habit more than strength. Up close, the damage was worse than she expected. The left side of his shirt was cut away, and beneath it a gunshot wound had been badly packed and badly managed. The dressing was saturated. The skin around it was angry and red. Fresh blood seeped through his fingers in slow, dark pulses. He had also been running a fever. That explained the eyes. "You're hit," Mara said stupidly. "Excellent work, detective." His voice was shredded, but the sarcasm still had teeth. She dropped to her knees beside him. But the sarcasm still had teeth. She dropped to her knees beside him. The ledger lying open on the rug caught her eye. Payments, names, dates, blood debts, funerals, widows. A line halfway down the page read, "Patrick Doyle settled monthly." Her father's name. Mara looked up sharply. "Why is my father in your book?" Luca followed her gaze. And for 1 second something unreadable moved across his face. "Later," he said. "If there is a later, there should be a hospital. There should be a lot of things. You need a surgeon. I need Vincent not to know I'm bleeding." He tried to shift and nearly blacked out. His head thudded back against the crib. Jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "What happened?" Mara asked. "Doc meeting." He drew air through his teeth. 3 nights ago ambush, bullet went through soft tissue. I stitched what I could, it reopened. 3 nights? He gave her a long, feverish look. "I'm having a poor week." Mara stared at the wound, at the heat radiating off him, at the blood creeping through the rug fibers. She was not a nurse. She was a woman who knew how to get red wine out of silk and limescale out of Italian faucets. That was not the same skill set. "I don't know how to fix this. You know how to follow directions?" "Yes." "Good. Then tonight you're a terrible doctor." He lifted a shaking hand and pointed toward a built-in cabinet behind the altar. Mara opened it. Inside sat the kind of private medical stock that existed only in houses where men expected trouble as a line item. Trauma dressings, sterile gauze, hemostatic packing, saline, antibiotics. 4 bags, suture kits, painkillers, a blood pressure cuff still in its box. Mara looked back at him. This was your plan. My plan, Luca said, voice thinning, was not to get shot. He almost smiled then, almost. It made him look younger and more dangerous at the same time. Mara grabbed gloves, saline, gauze, and the hemostatic dressing. Her hands were already shaking. When she peeled the ruined bandage away, Luca's fingers dug into the rug so hard the knuckles popped. He did not yell. He made one low sound in his throat. An animal sound stripped of dignity and pride. The wound was ugly, angry, contaminated. Whoever had tried to close it too fast had trapped half the problem inside. The edges were swollen. The packing smelled wrong. His shirt fibers were stuck to the blood. Mara swallowed hard. That's infected. Yes. You knew that? Yes, and you just stayed up here? His eyes flashed. I had an underboss downstairs measuring the drapes for my funeral. That answered more than enough. He told her what to do and clipped instructions. Each one dragged over broken glass. Irrigate, pull the filthy packing. Replace it, apply pressure, do not try to close the wound. Dress it, compression wrap, antibiotics after. Hydration now, fever later. Mara followed directions because panic was easier when it had verbs attached to it. When she pulled the old packing free, Luca's hand clamped around her wrist like iron. When she flushed the wound, his head dropped back, throat working. When she pressed the fresh gauze deep enough to slow the bleeding, sweat ran down his temples and disappeared into the collar of his shirt. More, he breathed. I already packed it. More, she added, more. By the time the new dressing was secured and the wrap was tight around his ribs, she was breathing as hard as he was. Her gloves were red, so was the Persian rug. So was the cuff of her sleeve where she had wiped her forehead without thinking. The bleeding slowed, not stopped, but slowed. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the windows. Candles shivered in their holders, somewhere in the walls. The generator hummed like a distant engine. Luca opened his eyes and looked at her properly for the first time. What's your name? Mara. Mara Doyle, he said softly, glancing at the ledger again. Of course. Something cold moved through her stomach. You know my family. I know your father. He's dead. Yes. The way he said it made her skin go tight. Luca leaned his head back against the crib and closed his eyes for a second before forcing them open again. Patrick Doyle drove from me before I had half this city by the throat, smart man, loyal. Once took a bullet meant for somebody more expensive. Mara felt the room tilt. No. Yes. My mother said he died in a robbery. She was told a cleaner story than the truth. The words landed like bricks. For years her father had been a photograph in a cheap frame and a cautionary tale about bad neighborhoods. Nothing more. Nothing clear. Nothing useful. And now his name sat open in a dead child's room in the house of the man everyone feared most. Luca watched the realization hit her. I paid your mother every month after he died, he said. Quietly. Because debts matter. Mara's voice came out thin. Those payments stopped 6 months ago. Luca was silent. Then he said, Vincent handles distributions now. And there it was. Not proof, but shape, motive, direction. She looked from Luca to the hidden monitors in the wall and understood something simple and hideous. If Vincent had cut off her family's money, if Vincent had arranged the dock ambush, if Vincent thought Luca was dying upstairs, then the whole house below them was not a home. It was a countdown. I should leave, Mara whispered. Though even saying it sounded childish. Luca's mouth twitched with bleak amusement. Leave the estate? Yes. After entering my most private room, patching my wound, and learning my underboss may have gutted your family's payments? Mara. He took a careful breath. If Vincent smells this on you, he won't let you reach the gate. She hated that he said it gently. It made it sound more true. "What is this room?" she asked quietly. His eyes moved to the photograph above the candles. "My daughter's." The answer hung there. "She died 9 years ago," he said. "Car bomb, intended for me. This was her room before I turned the rest into an archive. Nobody enters because there are only 2 things men like me cannot afford to display." He looked at the crib. Then at the ledgers. "Grief," he said. "And records." Mara did not know what to do with that. The monster in the rumors had a shrine. The king had a wound. The devil had kept paying a dead driver's widow because he believed debt outlived flesh. None of that made him good, it just made him complicated. Which in Mara's experience was usually more dangerous. Luca's eyes half closed again. "Top drawer," he muttered. "Orange bottle. 2 tablets." Mara found the antibiotics and a thermometer. His fever was high enough to frighten her. "Jesus, he's not invited in here." Despite herself, Mara gave a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Luca heard it, and something in the room eased by half an inch. By dawn the storm had passed, leaving behind a bruised gray sky and the kind of silence that came after a fistfight. Mara had changed Luca's dressings once more, bullied water into him, and learned that the easiest way to keep a stubborn crime lord alive was to speak to him like an irritated ant. At 6:30, she slipped downstairs through the service stairwell with bloody gloves wrapped in a trash liner and fear sitting cold behind her ribs. The house was waking up. Pans clattered in the kitchen. Coffee boiled. Guards came in wet from the perimeter with rain on their shoulders and tension in their jaws. Vincent arrived 10 minutes later in a camel overcoat. Smiling at everyone and no one, he looked fresh, rested. Like a man who had spent the night imagining promotion. Mara was wiping down a marble island when he entered. He poured himself espresso, leaned against the counter, and let his gaze drift lazily across the room until it stopped on her. "You're the new one," he said. "Mara, sir. Doyle, right?" Her spine turned to wire. "Yes, sir." His smile deepened by a fraction. "Long night." Flooded linen room. "Shame." He stirred sugar into his cup. "Storms shake loose all sorts of things." He sipped the coffee without breaking eye contact. Mara dropped her gaze first. Because sometimes survival was mostly theater, Vincent moved on. But not before she saw him signal one of his men toward the stairs. She waited exactly 4 minutes, then took a polishing cloth, a bottle of glass cleaner, and a gamble. Luca had given her instructions before she left the forbidden room study, bottom drawer of the desk. "Brass key, bring it to me, and if anyone stops you, remember you belong in rooms they forget to watch." His study smelled like tobacco and old paper. Mara locked the door. Found the brass key exactly where he said it would be. And nearly made it out clean. Nearly the handle turned just as she reached the threshold. Vincent stood on the other side with 2 soldiers behind him. "Well?" he said pleasantly, looking past her into the room. "That's odd." Mara held up the glass cleaner. "Mrs. Voss said the windows streaked." Vincent's eyes slid to her apron pocket where the outline of the key made the fabric bulge the tiniest bit. He saw it. She knew he saw it. The hallway went very quiet. Then Vincent smiled again. "All expensive teeth and poison. You're a conscientious girl," he said. "I admire that. Be careful in this house." "Curiosity tends to shorten careers." He stepped aside. Mara walked past him on steady legs that forgot how to work the moment she turned the corner. She got the key upstairs. Luca was awake when she entered, pale but more present. Sitting in a chair by the hidden monitors with a blanket over his shoulders and a pistol on the table beside him. He looked like hell in the way only powerful men ever could. Costly, disciplined, and 1 inch from catastrophe. "He knows something," Mara said. "He always knows something. He saw the key. Then we're out of time." Luca took the brass key, crossed to a locked compartment beneath the monitor console, and opened it. Inside was a stack of labeled drives, 2 ledgers and a small silver recorder. "Vincent wants these," he said. "Not the house, not the seat, the proof." "Proof of what?" "That he sold the dock route. that he's been skimming from captains. That he cut blood debt payments to families because he thought loyalty could be balanced like a budget. He held up the recorder. I keep insurance on enemies, on allies, on myself. Mara stared at the rows of screens showing the estate from a dozen angles. Foyer, garage, kitchen entrance, wine cellar, front gate, ballroom. On one of them, Vincent was in the library speaking, quietly with two captains and gesturing with the easy confidence of a man, already moving into the office before the old boss was cold. He's calling a sit-down, Lucas said. Tonight, ballroom, he'll tell them I'm gone. Ask for temporary control. And by morning, anyone still loyal to me will be isolated. Then call your people. I did. Luca's expression hardened. The people I trust are away handling a shipment in Newark. They won't be here in time. Mara looked from the screens to the recorder. So what's the plan? Luca looked at her. That was when she realized there was a plan. And she was in it. There's a speaker relay in the service hall outside the ballroom, he said. Old house, renovated wiring, still stupid. If you insert this drive into the hidden port behind the fuse cabinet and switch channel B to house audio, every man in that room will hear Vincent arranging my death. Mara blinked. That's your plan? My better plan involved not being shot. That one keeps coming up. It's a recurring disappointment. Even now. Hurt and fevered and running an empire from behind a child's nursery wall. He could still sound dry enough to make Panic feel briefly embarrassed. What if he sees me? She asked. He won't. You'll be serving water. What if he does? Luca picked up the pistol, checked the chamber, and set it down again with quiet finality. Then I'll come downstairs. Mara stared at him. You can barely stand. Yes, you're bleeding through your shirt. Yes, you could die. Luca met her eyes. Yes, that should have ended the conversation. Instead, Mara heard herself ask, why do you trust me? He looked at the open ledger on the desk. Patrick Doyle. Monthly settled, then at her. Because your father once trusted me at the worst possible moment, he said. And because last night you could have left me on the floor and didn't, he paused. And because Vincent looks at people like tools, you still look at them like they can bleed. The day dragged itself toward evening. Every hour brought a new reason to believe it would all collapse, Mrs. Voss barked at everyone and twice forgot what she was saying mid-sentence. Armed men took positions near the ballroom doors. Extra crystal was brought out. The long table in the dining room was set for captains. Vincent moved through it all with the polished composure of a man arranging his own coronation. Just after 7, he stopped Mara near the grand staircase. No 4th floor tonight, he said lightly. Mara kept her face empty. I've never been to the 4th floor. Sir. Vincent studied her. He reached out, pinched a loose thread at her sleeve, and brushed it away with eerie tenderness. That, he said softly, was your best answer. Then he walked off. By 9, the house felt like a bomb with manners. The captains arrived in dark coats and quiet shoes. Men kissed cheeks, shook hands, took stock. Nobody laughed too loudly, nobody drank too much. The ballroom chandeliers glowed over polished floors and long white tablecloths while outside the harbor lay, black and flat under the night. Mara moved through the room with a silver tray and a pulse pounding in her throat. Vincent stood at the head of the room near the fireplace. Gathering deference in little nods and murmurs, he had dressed in midnight blue. As if mourning somebody not yet buried at 917. He raised one hand. The room quieted. Mara slipped into the service hall with the tray, heart battering her ribs, and knelt beside the old fuse cabinet hidden behind a panel of wallpaper. Her fingers found the latch Luca had described. Behind it sat dusty switches, copper wiring, and a narrow metal port no one without a blueprint would ever notice. She pulled the drive from her apron. Her hands were slick. Inside the ballroom, Vincent began speaking in a low gray voice about continuity, stability, loyalty, and the heavy burden of leadership. Men like him always used funeral words when they wanted to steal something alive. Mara inserted the drive, a soft click. She flipped to the first switch. Nothing. She flipped the second. Still nothing. Inside. Vincent was saying. Out of respect for Luca's legacy, a shadow fell across the service hall. Mara turned. Vincent stood at the doorway. He did not look surprised. That was the worst part, he just looked tired. As though she had finally done the annoying thing he knew she would. Well, he said, almost kindly. There you are. Mara rose too fast and hit her shoulder on the wall. Vincent's eyes dropped to the fuse cabinet. Then to the drive in her hand, then back to her face. I was hoping you were just frightened, he said. Fear is manageable. Loyalty is expensive. He took one slow step into the hall. You went upstairs. Mara said nothing. Vincent sighed. That was a very poor choice. He reached into his jacket. And the house speakers crackled, not loudly, just enough. Vincent froze. A burst of static rolled through the ballroom, cutting off the murmur beyond the doors. Then a voice filled the estate. Vincent's voice, clear, close recorded. If the root leaks, the dock turns into a slaughterhouse and Moretti bleeds where he lands. After that, I take the captains, the ledgers, and the house. By the time anyone asks questions, the widow payments and old loyalties are dust. Silence hit the ballroom like a dropped blade. Vincent looked at Mara with pure hatred now. The mask had come off underneath. There was nothing warm in him at all. You stupid girl! He yanked the pistol free. Mara moved on instinct, not talent. She slammed the service tray into his wrist with both hands. Crystal exploded. The gun went off once, deafening in the narrow hall. The bullet punching into plaster above her head. Vincent cursed and grabbed for her. She stumbled backward into the cabinet, hit the last switch by accident. And every monitor channel in the hidden system dumped to house audio at once. Garage chatter, gate camera noise, hallway static, and Vincent's recorded treachery looping through it all like a confession from hell. Then another voice cut through the chaos. Low, hoarse, absolutely unmistakable. That's enough, Vincent turned. Luca Moretti stood at the far end of the service hall in a black shirt gone dark at the side. One hand braced against the molding, a pistol held steady in the other. He looked half dead. He looked biblical. The ballroom doors behind Vincent swung open. Captains crowded the threshold, staring first at Vincent, then at Luca. Then at the service hall like men realizing the ghost at the funeral had brought his own eulogy. Vincent's breathing went shallow. Luca, he said. Recovering just enough to try charm one last time. You're not well. No, Luca said, but I'm alive. Which must be inconvenient for you. Vincent's gun snapped toward Mara. It was the only move he had left. Luca fired before the barrel settled. The shot cracked through the ballroom and bounced off crystal and plaster. Vincent jerked, stumbled, and hit the wall hard enough to rattle the fuse cabinet. For one stunned second he stayed standing, eyes wide with disbelief. One hand pressed to the spreading red on his chest. Then his knees folded. He dropped at Mara's feet. Nobody in the doorway moved. The whole estate seemed to inhale and hold it. Luca lowered the gun by an inch and looked at the captains. His face had gone almost colorless with pain. But his voice still carried that same terrible authority it had carried the first day Mara saw him cross the foyer. Anybody else? He said. Want to budget loyalty? No one answered. One captain, old enough to know better and smart enough to survive anyway, stepped forward first and bowed his head. Then another. That was how empires turned back from the edge. Not with speeches, not with applause, just the collective recognition that the man everyone had been preparing to bury still had enough life in him to decide who went into the ground first. Only when the room settled did Luca's shoulders dip. Just slightly. Mara saw it, no one else did. She moved before she thought, crossing the blood-spattered tiles to get under his arm as his balance faltered. He looked down at her, surprised for a fraction of a second that anyone would touch him in front of witnesses. Easy, she muttered. A captain barked for a doctor. Luca's grip tightened on Mara's shoulder. One I choose, he said, even half-conscious. He delegated like royalty by dawn. The estate smelled like coffee. Bleach, burned wiring, and fresh consequences. Vincent's body was gone. So were the men who had attached themselves to his smile. The captains had been sent away with new instructions. Mrs. Voss had the kitchen running as if crisis were simply another course in a formal meal. Outside, the harbor glowed dull silver under a washed-out sky. Mara stood once again inside the forbidden room. Only now the candles had burned low. The nursery looked less like a rumor and more like a wound. And Luca Moretti sat in the chair by the window with a proper doctor's work finely bandaged under his shirt. He looked tired in a way that wealth could not hide, not weak. Just human enough to be dangerous in a different direction. On the table between them sat two things: a white envelope and the red leather ledger. Mara looked at the envelope first. If that's Friday's pay. I'd like to register a complaint. Luca's mouth tipped at one corner. About the amount. About the job description. Fair. She picked up the envelope. It was heavier than usual. Hazard pay? She asked. Considerably. And the rest? Luca touched the ledger with 2 fingers. Your father saved my life, he said. I repaid what I could. Vincent interrupted that. It won't happen again. Mara looked at the names written inside. Widows, brothers, funeral costs, school fees, hospital bills. It was not mercy. It was accounting for the dead, cold, systematic. Almost sacred in its own brutal way. You kept all this in here, she said quietly. I told you records. No. Not just records. Luca's eyes moved to the photograph of the little girl above the candles. No, he said after a moment. Not just records. Mara should have left then. Taken the envelope, walked out while walking out still existed. Instead she stood there in the room no one entered. With sunrise touching the nursery floorboards and the most feared man in the city watching her like she had become a variable he had not planned for and no longer wanted to lose. What happens now? She asked. Luca reached into his pocket and placed a small black key on the table beside the envelope. The rest of the house, he said, belongs to my staff. He pushed the key toward her. This room opens for you when I say it does. Mara looked at the key, then at him. That is a terrible promotion. It comes with better pay. She let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. Outside, gulls cried over the harbor. Inside, candle wax ran slowly down white pillars beneath the smiling photograph of a child neither of them could save. Mara picked up the key. There are doors people warn you away from because they believe monsters live behind them. And then there are doors that stay locked because once you step through, the monster stops being a story. He starts bleeding. He starts grieving. He starts remembering your father's name. And if he's powerful enough, and lonely enough, and dangerous enough, he might do the worst possible thing. He might ask you to stay. So, if you had opened that black door on the 4th floor and found Luca Moretti dying beneath the eyes of his dead daughter, would you have saved him? Or would you have run before he learned your name? Please subscribe channel.